if you if the census says African American, African American, African American, African American, you're African American, African American, African American, then the African tells you no, you're not. That's confusion, spiritual, and it also causes some sort of brain damage. You're being brainwashed, but not in a good way. You're being brainwashed in a way that's destroying your mind, because in one sense they're saying you're African American, then you're not African. Okay, so what's that doing? That's causing you to be brain damaged. It's a bastardization of a person.
Right.
Because you're already coming from a people who are culturalists.
Right.
Who have to create their own cultures and have effectively created, and it keeps getting stripped away. We won't even go there.
Right.
So, if I know I have this population that is brain damaged, I'm going to take advantage of that handicap.
Right.
It's just like, and I hate to say it, and this is going to sound horrible, it's like if you have a pile of children with Down syndrome, and you want to take advantage of it, you know if you there's going to be no repercussion. Not saying it's the same. What it is, you're taking advantage of the handicap.
Right.
So, a lot of places and institutions can see that handicap. Well, you're supposed to cause it. That's the game.
Right.
The game, the Stockholm Syndrome.
Right. Now, let's get back to why would they implement such a diabolical scheme as to infiltrate a particular area with less resources, and then the so-called solution to poverty in that area, which would be a crack. It's destruction on one side, but it's an opportunity on the other side, right?
Yes.
Why would they execute that upon us at, say, that time, like the 80s or whatever?
It's the easiest group. You can't go into it. I mean,
but why would they do it? That's the question. Why?
Well, it's twofold, and I think if you just follow the money, you'll find the answer. Everyone wants to follow these different things. Everything boils down to money and power. That's all it boils down to. Everything else, it doesn't make sense. It's money and power.
Who has the power?
Let's backtrack it. Okay, so let's look at the weapons coming on board the tracks in the 80s. Okay, so what did Reagan? Reagan had the war on drugs. Why are you declaring a war on drugs? Okay, wars have to be funded.
That you brought in, right?
The wars have to be funded,
right?
So it's all to make money. So somebody has to, and that drug trade was funding the Nicaragua and the Contras. So the drug trade in America was actually funding that. That was funding the rebels' war that was going on down there. Everything boils down to the money. So if I'm looking above here, and I'm pimping everybody. So that's what everybody thinks. It's about rich and poor, man. So if I'm sitting up there, I can't infiltrate the Spanish speakers because they speak Spanish and they're going to talk around me. I can't go after the middle class, traditional Americans, because they have this sort of this sense of community, like this sort of overly moral stance. Now you can do it in the poor communities then, because let's look, meth and all that you go to a trailer park, it's drug filled. Okay, they're selling just as many drugs. That's what people fail to realize. The poor white communities are just as being devastated by, and that's why they don't want the unity together.
Of course.
Okay, so let's go to the 90s. Okay, the prison industrial system, complex, which was brought in by Bill Clinton. They had to fill those prisons somehow. How they're going to fill them and who they're going to fill them with. They got to fill them with a population who does not have the means to fight back.
Right.
So if hey, look, all those houses you have and all that disposable income, you start putting that up for lawyers. But if you can't put it up for a lawyer, you got to take the charge. Okay. You have to take the charge, and the charge is going to get you. Hey, look, I was going to give you 10 for this, because your public defender is not there to get you off. Your public defender is just
pretender.
Oh, he's a pimp. He's just there because he's just there to get you. He's there to get you in.
So, all right. Very insightful. Let me lay it out this way.
But I'm going to hit you with the real thing. I'm going to hit you with the real deal why, but I'm going to save it for. I'm going to save it because I'm going to tell you this because it's going to be what it is. Man, is when they destroyed the black family. When I say they, I'm not talking about specific race. I'm talking about the political,
the actual structure,
the political corporate structure,
right.
Because everything is monetarily based. So when they destroyed that, what you developed was a celebration of a thug culture.
Mm-hmm.
Once NWA came out, because remember, that wasn't the original hip-hop music. Hip-hop music was story-based. It was just punk music, but with a rhythmic beat.
Right.
And everything was sort of lifting stuff up. But once they came out with the NWA, and there was some East Coast groups too, and the Ghetto Boys and stuff, but then you developed the celebration of a thug culture.
Right.
Traditional America does not Italians used to. Because there are other groups, Italians, I don't know why Italians don't get labeled with that too in Spanish, because there is a celebration of a thug culture, but I believe even Jamaicans and Africans don't embrace a thug culture like black Americans do.
Right.
Like they really get into it. They get into it like a Jerry Garcia concert, like a Grateful Dead. So I mean, it's a culture.
And what's sad, look, and here's what's sad. What is sad is that is a so-called one of the I guess staple personalities that's equated with quote unquote being black. Now you know it's like gangster this, gangster that. And that's almost the go-to or the what would be considered by a lot just through what we see on the quote unquote idiot box or whatever. Everything is popularized through this box that we all sit and we watch. Now, let me backtrack. Why would they implement such a diabolical scheme and then carry it out against these people or so-called African Americans or so-called blacks, myself included?
I believe there's a part of history. I'm going to cut you off, but this just came. I believe there's parts of history that are not taught in our schools because I believe that this country had black and white people both living together before the institution of slavery. Because if you look at the first Revolutionary War, one of the first people that was in the fight was Crispus Attucks. So do you think Crispus Attucks was the only black person in Boston? Hell no. Central Park was an all-black neighborhood. So they had black and white people living among each other. Now if you look through let's look at segregation for 1 second. Okay, segregation, they will never tell you this, but you had some of the biggest black millionaires. You had neighborhoods that were affluent. You had good schools. You had everything. They kept the money in the community, and they knew how to, because they knew how to. So they knew how to develop that. But on the outside, this money could not be touched because they had already developed the prejudice to separate. So you got this on the outside, but they said, "Hey, these people spend a lot of money in their community, and look, they're all wearing nice shirts, and they got nice houses, and their churches look immaculate, and they always wear." Remember, people did not worship the thug style. Remember, back in the day before the '60s, you were judged on how you dressed.
Right.
You had to dress immaculate.
Right.
Like you couldn't just walk out of the house. I mean, women wouldn't even talk to you unless you were dressed to the nine.
Right.
That's what Malcolm X used to do. Malcolm X used to sell those suits, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause you had to have a suit like that. And all of a sudden, here we are after the disco age. Because, disco, I think, I think the disco age, everybody kind of dressed the same. Right. It was sort of sexual sort of dress and a hippie. But then all of a sudden, look, the hip-hop came and they flipped the hip-hop. Right. They flipped it and they took it.
Right.
A portion of it.
Right.
And they manipulated it. And they weaponized it. They actually weaponized hip-hop. They weaponized it.
Oh, of course they did.
So, the black dollar was so, and I had somebody tell me this when I did a comedy show in Jacksonville, and I talked to this guy who's a Christian, and we're sitting there talking. He said, "Man, why do you think they had desegregation?" And I said, "Well, I really didn't know." He said, "Because grass is always greener on the other side." They tricked black people into thinking,
of course they did,
that they wanted to come integrate, and when they did, all they did was tap into the black dollar, and they killed the black businesses.
Now, you just grazed upon the point that I was going to make. Here's why they implemented that against us. Because if you think about the Great Depression, right? That was what, like 1920, right? Mm-hmm. So 1920s, America was in what we all know as the Great Depression, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. There were certain black cities that were balling.
During the Depression?
During the Depression.
Wow.
During. Okay. So you figure if Black Wall Street, which is one of the most popular ones, there's Rosewood, which was like another.
I think every city had one.
And there's a few other ones too. Even out here in L.A., Central Avenue, you know, was, I think at one point dubbed like the Harlem of the West Coast. There were many, many, many areas where newly freed or recently freed black folks had migrated to a particular area, and like you said, you know, a lot of them had educated their own selves and with their innate gifts, you know, from God, you know, and like everything, and everything was like the amount of ingredients that went into this whole thing. You know, you're an actual slave, or your mama was a slave, and now here, all of a sudden, you're free, and you're used to hard work. Now you're working for yourself. Now you're free, working for your own self. Well, for example, in Tulsa, you know, they actually had like, I believe they had like a hospital, a post office, a couple schools, you know, a bank, a few lawyer firms, a grocery store. They were working on an airport. They had all of the amenities and like everything, and they had built this from the ground up. Imagine white folks just a mile away in the next town. They happen to notice that these Negroes or these niggas or these niggers, which we're going to get on the N word right after this to explain that it is not a bad word. Mm-hmm. It's just a word used in a bad way.
Weaponized.
That's after this. But look at these niggers living better than us. And there was this resentment that arose, and they went in to confront, you know, these uppity niggers that was, you know, balling, or they was, you know, and that was just one. There were several towns where there was black folks that were doing their thing, and they were living the quote unquote American dream. Mm-hmm. The resentment rose. Do you know there was over 400 riots between the turn of the century, 1900 and up through like 1960. Over 400 riots, most of which the vast majority was precipitated by, Caucasians. And a lot of this, it stemmed from jealousy. So you got to figure, in 1934, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, instituted what was known as the New Deal. Long story short, that was basically welfare exclusively for white folks, or mainly or they were the ones that benefited the most by it. This enabled them to purchase a home, and all of this happened right after the Great Depression of the 1920s. Well, what that did was that allowed white folks to have what we know as generational wealth. If you're able to pass a house down to your children, they're already a leg up. So all they have to do is work to accumulate enough money to go purchase another house. Bam, and there goes. At the same time, redlining was introduced and implemented and enforced. So it was illegal for certain groups to live outside of these red areas. At the same time, in that same period, you had black athletes that were breaking the color barrier. Now, white owners of these teams, they didn't necessarily want to do this per se, but what it wound up doing was putting the best athletes on the field.
But it's good business.
Right?
You had to. You have to keep competing.
We fast forward now.
Hey, can I pause it real quick?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's pause it. 3, 2, 1. There we go. We're good.
So it all boiled down to placing the best athlete on the field. So what we wind up with now is we have the recognition of the true wealth of a particular group of people. Meaning, here we have these people that have been enslaved or whatever. And I had somebody ask me once because they had heard me spouting off a bunch of history that hadn't been told. And it sounded very hostile.
Hey, could you hand me some chips?
Oh, yes, sir.
If there's any left?
Yes, sir. Got these Doritos right here.
Thank you, sir.
Shameless plug right there, you know what I mean?
Hostile people, go ahead. I want to hear about these hostile people who came at you.
And a question was asked. I hear you saying all of this about what's been done to black people and everything else, and over the years. And I hear you, and this was a person who was also, quote unquote, a person of color, which is, don't even get me started on that. But he was of Asian or Pacific Islander descent, and he asked me a question as in, well, I've heard you speaking all of this about, what's been done and all these things that have happened. What's the solution? I never hear you speak about the solution. And so I look at him and I said, well, the solution is very simple. If you leave black folks alone, just leave them alone. Just like